The tradition in this community is that it really is a we community. From day one, it was all about fairly large groups of citizens making change. When we incorporated, there were 20 candidates. Every candidate was an enthusiast about incorporation. We didn't have a single naysayer in the group. And so for a year plus, all 20 of us traveled the city talking about the timeliness of incorporation. A couple years later, when we had completed our general plan, it was called the 49ers. It was a group of 49 citizens, 7 on each subcommittee, developing the general plan for this new community. We had more volunteers on commissions than you could count. At one time, I believe we had over 400 volunteers sitting on walkways commissions and trailways commissions and Bart Commission and Police Commission, so that it was always a community of we.
Okay. And let's take it back a little further. Why did folks want the city to be incorporated? They weren't happy with the county running things?
There were short-term trends and long-term threats. The long-term threat was that BART was due to open in Lafayette in 1970. The feeling was that any community on the BART line would feel tremendous population pressure. And that, in fact, turned out to be true if we look at the development of congestion on Highway 24. And then there were short-term incidents where the county approved projects that were totally incompatible with local values. In fact, one of the ironies is that in this recent week's election on Prop L, involving the northwest quadrant of Highway 24 and Pleasant Hill Road, we have an echo of a property that was developed called the Zeebeck properties, approved by the county before we incorporated. At Carroll Lane, we called it the Anthill. Carroll Lane and Mount Diablo in the southwest quadrant of that interchange. It was the Anthill that said to the city, if we remain under county values, so we have to keep marching to Martinez to make the case for the kind of quality of life in this predominantly single-family residential community, we were going to lose. In the 50s and 60s, Lafayette grew post-World War II at a rapid pace, and people were not all that concerned about the way in which a community like Lafayette would grow. By the late 60s, things were changing, and we were becoming extremely concerned with the way in which these communities could grow and become, by our values, overdeveloped. We also, by the late 60s, had a sufficient commercial development so that we could make a very powerful case that we would be a no property tax city. And that was a huge theme in our incorporation, that we would generate sufficient numbers from sales tax revenues to support a relatively low service suburban community. We weren't small government, no property tax, and indeed that's something that could not be stated before that because our commercial area was not sufficiently developed. So when you put together the fact that we could stand on our own 2 feet financially, when there were all kinds of threats of overdevelopment, And when people were sick of traveling to Martinez to be heard, it was time. I had only been in Lafayette for 2 years. I was by far the youngest council person. I was still in my 20s. I'd gotten caught up in the incorporation campaign, and it really became a cause for me. And then to be the top vote getter was a surprise and a compliment, and I felt really blessed to have a chance to be a part of a new government. What I'll say as backdrop to the answer to your question is that we woke up the next morning after the incorporation election. We didn't have a staff member, we didn't have a policy, we didn't have a statute. We had nothing, and we had ignorance because none of us had been through this before. But we learned fairly quickly, and we worked very hard at it, and we had 4 very effective councilmen. We had one who was not very useful, but that passed quickly when the people got familiar with him and voted him out of office after a couple of years. Don was our first mayor and deserved to be. He had been the head of the Lafayette Design Project. He'd been here for years and was a really effective leader of the community. The first commission we set up was the Bart Commission, and Don asked Grodin Holmes if he would chair that commission because we were very concerned about the impacts of Bart. The second commission we set up, and I said yes to chair this at Don's request, was the Fire Commission. And that was an unusual challenge because under the law of California, local districts can be eliminated by a newly incorporated city without a citywide vote if those decisions are made within the first calendar year of incorporation, which meant that, and this law may no longer be on the books, it meant that having incorporated at the end of July, if we made a decision by the end of December, we could eliminate local districts that we thought were no longer timely. In this case, it was the fire district. Now, the fire district was a source of great personal and local pride. It had been in business since 1911. When our fire engines went down the street, we felt patriotic. I mean, the pride was terrific. We created a group of 7 or 9 citizens to look at whether or not it made sense for us to maintain our little fire district or to join the very large and growing consolidated fire district in the valley, which had the benefits of great equipment, great backup, great training, and we decided to recommend to the City Council that the fire district be liquidated.
I can imagine that must have been really
And it was very controversial. Of course, my commission and I wrote the report. It came to the council in December, and we made a timely vote to join the consolidated fire district and to end the life of this fire district that went back to 1911. I think that bringing governance home has changed the face of Lafayette forever. In process, we've had a very high level of local government. Integrity, consistency, excellent people elected to office and dedicated to service. We've had a tremendous volunteer involvement that has enriched us greatly. In terms of physical outcomes, the biggest change was in our adoption in 1970 of a new general plan that stated our values, that effectively reduced our population by almost twice. We are at a population level now of about 25,000, which is what we envisioned in 1970 when we were at about 17,000, with multiple buildings concentrated in the middle of the city for the benefit of people who don't want to live or can't afford to live in single-family residences, and the rest a single-family residential community with a lot of green space and protected areas. Elements of that general plan included the provision for walkways, for parks, for trailways, for bicycle paths, all kinds of things that have been amenities of this community. It's a proud tradition. There were a number of planning ordinances that were quite pioneering. Protection of the ridge lines, protection of the hillsides by reducing the density of development on steep slopes, the tree ordinance to encourage the planting of native plants and cutting back on the planting of plants that are non-native. One of the most dramatic local ordinances was the sign ordinance. It changed the face of Lafayette literally overnight. Lafayette at that time downtown was a commercial strip, and all you could see, it was like our pictures of Sunset Boulevard. Nothing but signs. Who had the biggest sign? Whose sign could protrude more? And there were jokes about it. A lovely businessman argued for his sign, and he said, "I need it to be seen from the freeway." And he said, "Do you mean from the nut tree?" And we laughed, but it's true, which actually underscores something that is singular about our community, and that is the relationship between the commercial community, the business community, and the residents. Without the support of the Chamber of Commerce and lots of businessmen who were very involved in their leadership of the community, we couldn't have adopted that sign ordinance. We couldn't have beautified Mount Diablo Boulevard and Pleasant Hill Road. There are so many things that it would have been impossible for us to do. We couldn't have had a Concours d'Elegance starting in 1970 and going for 30 years to support local charities. It was the local business community, and that was a huge accomplishment and maybe one of our greatest treasures. I can look around the city and I can see things in which I had a strong voice or I was an influential vote. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. It was never about anyone individually. It was really all about legislative processes in which we strived always to reach consensus, and almost always did. There were times when we disagreed, but it was rational, and it was balanced, and it was reasonable. And you look around the community, and there isn't a corner of the community that kind of moderating legislative style hasn't shaped. Now, for me personally, I benefited personally because I was the kid. I was in my 20s. I had been in student government. I'd been the president of my classes, and I'd done all of that. But being a city councilman, being California's youngest mayor, being the head of LAFCO, being the first Lafayette person to chair the local agency formation commission, being the first person to chair the mayor's conference for the county. These were incredible growth experiences for me personally. I learned a lot about leadership, and I learned a lot about the we. We set a standard with that first city council. We didn't allow this one John Bircher to politicize the process and make it any more toxic than he could make it. Once he got off the council, the community continued to elect Democrats, Republicans, centrists. And the pressure in the community was always toward the center. We never allowed ourselves to be caught up in Berkeley talk. We never allowed ourselves to be caught up in San Francisco talk. We never got caught up in Oakland or Richmond talk. It was always about the community. And I think that there was peer pressure. There was peer pressure. I'll give you an example since I think we're off the record now. I love Grodin Holmes, the late Grodin Holmes. He was our second mayor, good guy, a surgeon. Mormon, got elected largely by the Mormon vote. But terrific, you know, great guy. Conservative. So we had an issue. We had 2 or 3 shops open up on Mount Diablo Boulevard selling palmistry.
Okay.
So the issue between Grodin and me was, do you prohibit palmistry or do you regulate palmistry? Think about it.
Classic question.
So there's a very liberal position, which is you don't prohibit things that don't do damage to consenting adults and the community. You regulate them. And Gordon's position was, this is crazy, this is ridiculous, this is terrible stuff, we don't want it in Lafayette, prohibit it. Well, there were those kinds of subtle differences that came up periodically. We voted, and I think we regulated palmistry because Don and I, despite differences in background, thought very similarly. We joked about it must be in the dirt. That he came from Oregon, I came from Minnesota. I'm a DFL type of guy, and he was an Oregon Republican, but it must be in the dirt. We thought very similarly. And then there were other councilmen, good people, Wally Costa, Jim Davey, Ned Robinson, Barbara Langlois, who really wanted a consensual kind of process. And I think that that is a tradition that has stuck with Lafayette.
What would your message be?
The message is be proud of it, cherish it, value it, support it, become involved. Always vote, become involved, volunteer. There are so many opportunities to become a part of the decision making, and cherish it and protect it, because you don't find communities like this everywhere. It's a very rare community.